Hey everybody, how's it going? I hope each and every one of you are doing fantastic since we last caught up and that you're ready for another video. My name is Denise and today I'm going to be answering the question that Ahmed and myself literally get asked over and over and over again. It is the question that we get asked the most, and today I'm going to go through that in a lot more thorough detail. But before I get started, I wanted to show you a little clip that I filmed earlier today with Phoenix. We went for a drive down to the detention center where he's currently being held, and just filmed a little bit of the outside so that you guys can actually see what it is that I'm talking about when I talk about these things. So let's just quickly go there and show you that before we get started. So we're nearing the detention center now, and as you guys can see, it's pretty much just in a normal built-up residential zone. I doubt that a lot of the people that live in this area even know that a detention center is built here. It used to be an old army base where the army used to train and whatnot, but now it is a detention center. So that's where it starts, like this big barbed wire fence, like electric fence, and honestly it feels like a prison when you come here. Actually, it kind of feels like an asylum, like a mental asylum coming here. I know I've been to visit in a prison before, and even a prison didn't feel this cold. Like, it didn't feel like this. It felt a bit more inviting, but this just feels different. It feels really institutionalized. Those are units there. That's where all the detainees sleep, and Ahmed's in there somewhere. And these gates, you don't even have these in prison, like literally. The compound that we just saw there houses all the men, and the one that we're about to see now, like once we cross this strip of road to your left, it actually houses families and women. So that there, that's where all the women are being detained in detention. And we just left the detention center. My boy over there is hungry, so he wanted to get a kebab. Hey Phoenix! Alright, so we just left the detention center and Phoenix is really hungry, so we stopped by to get him a kebab. The kid never used to eat kebabs, but somewhere along the line he's decided that he likes kebabs now, which is really good because he's always been really skinny and I've always wanted him to eat a little bit more. I really wanted to show you guys Phoenix because I know it's only been 4 months since you last saw him on a video, but honestly in those 4 months he has grown so much, and he looks like a little young man now. It's not like a little boy anymore. Oops, here he comes. And yes, Phoenix, I really did vlog you out of the sunroof. Oh boy, there you go, okay. Hey Phoenix, say hi to Team vmffam. Look at him, doesn't he even sound different? What you got there, boy? Kebab. So guys, we're just gonna update you a little bit on what's been going on since you last saw Phoenix. Do you want to tell the guys what you've been up to?
Can you just ask me some questions? Because I don't know.
How do you find Year 7?
It's alright, it's a bit hard, but it's better than primary school, honestly.
Yeah. Do you enjoy it?
No.
But Phoenix has now started drum lessons and he is now part of a school.
Bang.
Can you see the enthusiasm in the kid's face?
So I play the drums in my school band and I'm performing like for the first time at like June or July?
Yeah, June.
June, like the 20 something. I don't feel nervous at all.
Not yet.
No, not at all.
Music runs in our blood, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I've been like training for 2.5 years in karate, and it's been really hard. And of course tomorrow I've got hill runs at 7:30 in the morning, which kind of sucks. And I'm also gonna go to Japan in October to compete for my first
overseas
national tournament.
No, it's not national, it's international. Your first international.
For my first international tournament in Okinawa.
Is it Okinawa or Osaka?
It's Okinawa.
Oh really?
Pretty sure, yeah.
Oh my god, I'm so pumped for Japan. I can't wait. That's going to be your first time going overseas.
Yeah, can't wait to try proper Japanese sushi.
It's going to be tough competition because
apparently they're like really fast.
yeah, but that's what all your training is for, right? He's like got a real intense training schedule, 5 nights a week.
Yeah, sometimes 6.
And hill runs starting 7:30 tomorrow morning. Oh well, you know what? On the bright side, you'll be really fit, won't you?
Anyway, guys, wish me luck, and I'll catch up with all of you soon.
So the question that myself and Ahmed get asked over and over and over again by pretty much everybody that we speak to about his situation is, when is Ahmed going to get out? Honestly, I wish I knew. I honestly wish I knew, and he honestly wishes that he knew. If we could have a crystal ball right now and ask this crystal ball anything at all and it would give us an answer, we would ask, what day is Ahmed going to be released? When is he finally going to get out? It's hard to really comprehend and explain to people, because no one can really comprehend it when we explain it to them, that there is no release date. Like, he could be in there for as long as the government chooses. He could be in there for, he's at their will. He could be in there for as long as they want him to be in there. They don't have to give him a release date, and until now, they've given him no release date. But to really clarify the questions that keep crossing our paths over and over again, I think it's essential that I go back a little bit and explain how it is that he has been able to be held in immigration detention for 4.5 years right now. Like, as we speak today, at the time of this video being published, he has been there for 4.5 years. In October 2019, he would have been in detention for 5 years. That's if he's still there. And honestly, pray to God, fingers crossed, that that day doesn't happen, that he's released before then. So how is it that our government department has managed to detain him for 4.5 years so far? Basically, back in October 2014, Ahmed was called into the Immigration Detention Centre head office in Melbourne, and he was told that he had an appointment with them and to come in for an interview. I was on the phone to him at the time that he received this news, and I said to him, whatever you do, do not go into that interview. And he was like, why? Like, it's nothing, it's just an interview. What could happen? I want to know what's going to happen with my case, because at that time, he had an application pending. And I said to him, I go, honestly, don't go without the presence of your lawyer. His lawyer at the time wasn't his lawyer, sorry. His migration agent at the time was interstate, I believe, but he wasn't in Melbourne. Like, he wasn't in town. And I said to Ahmed, I go, whatever you do, do not go in. I said, whatever you do, don't go in there unrepresented. Don't go in there without your migration agent. And as always, being the man that he is, he didn't listen to a thing that I said, and he goes, no, it should be fine, I'll just go in. He walked in to that office back in 2014, October 2014, and he has never walked out since. He pretty much walked in thinking that he was just going in there for an interview, because that's how they coaxed him into getting him there. And as soon as he got in, they basically said, your visa's been cancelled, and as of now, you're being detained. They handcuffed him on the spot and pretty much shipped him off to a detention centre. So later that day, he was able to get his paperwork to me, and I was able to read through it thoroughly and see what exactly happened. And basically, his permanent residence, his status, was cancelled by the immigration minister. When people in Ahmed's situation get their visas cancelled, it can get cancelled by one of two people. It can either get cancelled by one of the minister's delegates, so that's just someone who works for the minister, or someone that works in the department, has authority to make these decisions on behalf of the minister, or it can be cancelled by the immigration minister himself. Now, if your visa is cancelled by a delegate of the minister, you have an avenue of appeal. Like, you've got the option to appeal that decision through the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, the AAT. If your visa has been cancelled by the minister himself, you basically lose the privilege of having that avenue of appeal. You can't appeal to the administrative tribunals, and you basically have very, very, very limited options as to what you can do. Unfortunately, in Ahmed's situation, his visa was cancelled by the then minister, who is currently our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, and Scott Morrison himself had cancelled Ahmed's visa. When his visa was cancelled, there were a whole bunch of conditions and a whole bunch of bullet points in the cancellation itself that said what he could and couldn't do. So basically, he couldn't do anything. There was no avenue of appeal for him. He wasn't able to apply for any other visa. It was basically, it's been cancelled and you're going to be deported. However, in Ahmed's situation, he traveled to Australia on a Syrian passport, and Australia recognises him as a Syrian citizen. It doesn't really need to be said, the situation that's going on in Syria and has been going on for a while. It's been a war-torn country for quite some time now, and this was no different back in 2014. He basically had no other legal options whatsoever other than to apply for a protection visa. A protection visa that basically said that he couldn't return to Syria because his life would be at threat. Fast forward a couple of years, it literally took the department 2 years. 2 years from the time that he put in his application to give him an outcome on his visa status. During these 2 years, Ahmed had been moved around from detention centre to detention centre, all around Australia pretty much. He started in Melbourne, but back then it was in Maribyrnong. That has since closed down. And when he was there, we were able to visit him because obviously it's in the same city as where we live. And myself and his family and his friends were visiting him frequently. And I personally was visiting him every day. So about 8 months into his detention, the department decided that they would move him to a different centre, and came in the middle of the night one night. The officers grabbed him. They always do that. They come while you're sleeping. They take you while you're sleeping, and that's what they did in this case. 2 o'clock in the morning, they grabbed him and pretty much said, you're being shipped off. And we had no idea where he was being moved to, because they don't really tell you these things, you know, after it's happened. And the next day I had a visit booked in to go see him, but when I had tried calling him throughout the day, his phone was switched off. I couldn't get a hold of him, and I thought, this isn't right. Like, something just was a bit off. Like, it was unusual for him to not answer his phone and not make any contact whatsoever. So I had called one of the other guys that was in the same unit as him, and they advised me that at 2 o'clock in the morning he was moved out of that detention centre, and they had no idea where he had been moved to. Naturally, we were all pretty frantic, pretty worried, because we didn't know where he had been moved to. We didn't know whether he was being moved to another detention centre or whether they had come in the middle of the night and taken him back to Syria. Like, it's just unknown. You don't know these things, and they don't tell you. I tried calling the detention centre, I tried calling his caseworkers, and I tried getting his migration agent to make some phone calls to find out where he was. And basically everywhere we turned, we got no answers. Everyone just told us, I'm sorry, we can't tell you this, we can't discuss this, and which is honestly totally absurd. Like, it's your family, you know, we're his family. That's our family member. Like, this is a man who has people that cares about him, who has family that worry about him, and to be told that, I'm sorry, we can't tell you where we've taken him, it's a feeling that you can't describe. Like, imagine someone that you cared about being taken by a government department in the middle of the night, and when you try to make inquiries as to their whereabouts, they say, well, we can't tell you. What do you mean you can't tell us? Anyway, luckily for him, he was only taken interstate, and he was taken to Perth, and when he finally landed later that evening, he was able to make contact with us and let us know where he was and that he was safe and that he was okay. So in this instance, the immigration minister had since changed from the first minister that had cancelled his visa. And when he got his decision this time as to the outcome of his protection visa, we were all thinking, okay, Syria is a war-torn country. Everybody knows that you can't send someone back to Syria even if you wanted to. Lawfully, Australia cannot send anyone back to Syria. If they fled Syria for their safety, they cannot be returned there. We were all thinking, okay, so he'll get approved for his protection visa. He'll be out in the community before we know it, because it just made sense to us that you can't be returned to Syria and you can't stay in detention for the rest of your life. So naturally you would be returned to the community. But when we got the decision to his application, we were all really, really freaking shocked to find out that the then minister refused his protection application. Once again, it was the immigration minister himself that signed off on that. So we had no avenue of appeal. No avenue of appeal through the tribunal. You can't even go through the court system to appeal this decision. And we were pretty much just thinking, well, what now? Like, what happens from here? And we were thinking, like, what's going to happen now? Because we all know that he can't be returned to Syria. All the lawyers that we spoke to had told us the same thing, that legally he cannot be sent back to Syria. Like, Australia just physically cannot remove him at this stage. So we started questioning, like, what was the alternative? Is he really going to sit there forever? Like, no, surely that can't be the alternative. Surely it can't be the alternative that he's going to spend infinity in detention, like indefinite, no release date, and until they say so, basically. Honestly, it was one of the most helpless moments of our lives. Like, I don't think myself or Ahmed have ever really felt more helpless than in that particular moment, because there in front of you just lies this massive question mark that hangs over your future. It's like, oh, what's going to happen? Like, I don't know, like it just left me so speechless. Like, we honestly just didn't know how to feel about it. We didn't know what to think about it, because I just couldn't comprehend, and I couldn't accept that our future would look like that. I couldn't accept that our future would consist of him spending the rest of his life in detention and me visiting him behind bars for the rest of his life. And I couldn't comprehend or accept that it was even possible that a government could even do this, or that it was even legal for a government to do this. After receiving the news of Ahmed's outcome, it took us a good couple of days to digest it and to accept it and to get our grounding again and really sort of think strategically about what our next move was going to be. So I then embarked on the quest of reaching out to as many lawyers and as many solicitors as I possibly could. I think over the next 2 weeks, I spent countless hours on the phone ringing lawyer after lawyer after lawyer, and sending countless emails out. Like, between Ahmed and myself, I think we honestly sent out over 100 emails to lawyers in the state, to lawyers interstate, to lawyers in the country, and even lawyers outside of the country, because like I said, I just couldn't accept that that was going to be our fate. Like, there had to be another way out. Like, that could not just be it. Like, it couldn't. So we needed to seek legal advice, and I was adamant that I would only seek legal advice from a professional that specialized in that area of immigration law. Because the change of legislation at the time that allowed for his visa to be cancelled was fairly new. And when I say fairly new, I mean it had only been around for a few months when Ahmed was taken into immigration detention. Not many lawyers were really familiar with what to do, and not very many lawyers were familiar with what was possible, because there had been no previous cases before to set any sort of precedent. And a lot of the responses that we were getting from solicitors were, I'm sorry, but there's nothing that we can do. So because we didn't have the option of appealing through the tribunal, we found out through certain legal avenues that the only way that we would be able to have our case heard before a court is if there was a lawyer out there that could find some sort of judicial error that the minister had made in making his decision. So basically what that means is that a lawyer has to go through your 300 plus pages of paperwork to try to find a tiny little error somewhere in all of that the minister might have made while making the decision about Ahmed's application. Out of the hundreds of lawyers that we spoke to and sent our paperwork to, 99.9% of them all turned around and said there is no legal error. The minister made his decision according to law. So basically, even if the law sucks, and even if you disagree with the law, if it's written as law and the minister made his decision within the lines of that piece of legislation, then what they were pretty much telling us was that we didn't have a leg to stand on to try to dispute that in court. You pretty much have 35 days to take your case to court if you are lucky enough to find a solicitor who manages to find some sort of legal error in any of your paperwork. Ahmed and I were cutting it pretty fine. We weren't having any luck with any lawyers and our time was running out. About 2 weeks before the actual cutoff date, I received an email from one lawyer who thought that she might be able to represent us. So naturally, I was really eager to speak to her and keen to see what it was that she thought that she might be able to assist us with. So the next morning, I spoke to Ahmed about it and I told him about this particular lawyer who had got back in contact with us. And honestly, for the first time in 2 years, we started to feel like there was perhaps some glimmer of hope, maybe. I scheduled an appointment with this lawyer, and when I went to see her, she went through in really fine detail as to why she thought that we could possibly have a case to bring before the federal court. The federal court is basically the only court that Ahmed could have his case heard in because, as I said earlier, the minister himself cancelled his visa, so we couldn't go through the tribunal. However, for our case to be heard in the federal court, a judge of the federal court had to be satisfied that our lawyer had found legal error on the minister's behalf. So at this point, even though we had found a lawyer who thought that she might be able to assist us, we still didn't know for sure whether we had a case until she put it together and presented it to a judge who would then say, okay, you know what? There's grounds here and I'll hear it. Our lawyer engaged in the services of a barrister, and between her and the barrister, we honestly had a really strong legal team. Our barrister encouraged us to pursue our case through the federal court, and honestly, we didn't really have a choice because if Ahmed didn't take his case to the federal court, he basically had no other options. Like, there was no other court of appeal, there was nothing other than indefinite detention. So at that point, it was the federal court or indefinite detention. We were really lucky that we got a judge that believed that we had grounds straight off and gave us a court date that was not too far away. We got a court date a lot quicker than our lawyer thought that we would get one, and at that point we were all really hopeful that we would get some sort of resolution to this whole nightmare, basically. So the day finally came where Ahmed's case would be heard in court, and myself and his family, we all went there that day in high hopes that this would be the beginning of a resolution to this nightmare. Ahmed unfortunately wasn't able to be at court that day because by the time his court case had come around, he had been shifted again from the Perth Detention Centre to Christmas Island. So he wasn't even in Australia. I mean, Christmas Island is technically part of Australia, but it's not on Australian land. Like, it's closer to Indonesia than what it is in Australia. It's basically an island between here and Indonesia. It is still technically part of Australia, even though it is a freestanding island of its own. So they weren't going to fly him back for that court case because he had legal representation. It was a one-day hearing, and his barrister got up and spoke, and I must say, like, biggest respect to his barrister. He did such an amazing job representing him, and especially because, like, I love watching law shows, and every time I watch TV and I see a barrister get up and fight in court and he's put forward a really awesome argument, I think, oh my god, that was awesome. And for the first time in my life ever, I got to experience that, but in real life. It wasn't a bloody TV show. It was Ahmed's barrister, and he left me feeling like I had just finished watching a well-constructed, a well-orchestrated TV show. And I thought, oh my god, like, that was amazing. His delivery was on point. Like, it was just amazing. We didn't get a decision that day because obviously the judge needed to take away all the material that had been presented to him from both parties. But the judge did say that he would try and deliberate a verdict as soon as possible. One thing I should probably mention though, before I continue, is that even though we had our case heard in the federal court, they don't have jurisdiction to say, all right, I'm giving this man his visa back and release him from detention. Basically, the purpose of that hearing was to prove that the minister had made a legal error when he applied his ministerial powers in Ahmed's decision. And if the judge found that the minister had in fact made legal error, he had the power to quash that decision and refer it back to the minister to remake according to law. After the court case, we were all hopeful, and I felt that it went really well, and we were all really hopeful that we would have a really good outcome, and as I said earlier, that this would be the end of, you know, this 2-year, at the time, this 2-year nightmare. The decision came back pretty quick. The judge didn't waste too much time giving us the decision. Within a few weeks, our lawyer was back at court receiving the decision that the judge had come to. That particular day, I'm telling you, was one of the happiest days of our lives. Honestly, it was overwhelming, it was amazing, and it literally filled us with so much hope, because that very day, a judge of the federal court came back and said he had found that the minister had made legal error in his decision when applying his ministerial powers to Ahmed's application. He basically ordered that that decision be quashed and it be remade according to the law. Little did we know that when the federal court judge quashed that decision and ordered that the minister remake that decision according to law, that it was gonna literally take another fucking 2 years. We thought at best, you know, it's only gonna take a few weeks, maybe a month, maybe 2 months, and he would be home like within a matter of time, because in all honesty, that decision was deferred back to the minister to remake, but it's not like he had to remake the decision with new information. Like, everything that they needed to know about Ahmed, they had all the information, all the facts about him, everything to establish his identity, basically everything in terms of paperwork that they needed, they already had. So all they had to do was remake that decision, but this time when the minister applied his ministerial powers, that he had to do it within the boundaries of the law. So we thought, like, honestly, it's only going to take a couple of months at best. Time passed and more time passed and more time passed. By the time we got the decision, it was 2 years from the date that the judge had ordered the minister to remake that decision. And in those 2 years, like I said, so many things had happened. You know, Ahmed had been moved from detention center to detention center. But by the time he got his decision this time round, he was back in Melbourne. So he'd literally done full circle, you know, been around to all the different detention centers, and he was back in Melbourne where we could see him and we could visit him again. When he came back to Melbourne and I went to see him, it had been 2.5 years. Like, it had been a good 2.5 years since I had last seen him, and that, might I add, was really tough in itself. Like, it's, imagine someone that you care about being so far away and you can't even see them. The only contact that you have is by phone, and you can't see them not because you choose not to, but because it's not in your hands, it's in the hands of our government. Basically, they could have left him in the detention centre in Melbourne, but for whatever reason that we'll never know, they decided to ship him, you know, off onto an island like 6,000 kilometers away. So we finally get this decision, and might I add, we didn't get this decision easily. We had to engage in another solicitor who was constantly on their backs about a decision, because the time that it was taking to even make that decision, to remake the same decision, might I add, was unreasonable. So anyway, so it was another 2 years later, as I said, from the court date, that we finally got the decision that the judge had ordered the minister to remake. And in all honesty, it was really fucking disappointing, because it took them 2 years to remake the exact same decision. 2 fucking years to come to the conclusion that they came to 2 years before that. The only difference this time round was that the minister himself didn't make the decision, which is kind of fucking weird in itself. Like, it's really bizarre, but the minister didn't make the decision this time round. It was actually one of his delegates. And because one of his delegates made that decision, it meant that we now had an avenue of appeal through the tribunal. So Ahmed had spoken to me about putting his application for the tribunal to hear, and I don't know what it was, but there was something that just did not sit right with me. Going back to the last few videos where you've seen me talk about intuition and spirituality, this was one of those moments. This was one of those moments where something inside of me, my intuition, call it guidance, call it my higher being, call it my angels, call it whatever you like, but something inside of me said, going through the tribunal was going to be the wrong decision. I couldn't articulate it at the time because I couldn't quite put into words why I didn't want him to appeal that decision. All I knew was that there was a really strong urge inside of me that was basically saying that was the wrong decision. It was the wrong thing to do to go to the tribunal. We spoke to our legal representative about it, and she urged us to go to the tribunal, and she basically said, look, you know, it's an avenue of appeal. Maybe we should put in your appeal papers, and if you change your mind through the process, you can always withdraw it. But unlike the federal court, you've only got 14 days to get your paperwork in. Once again, like, I couldn't give her a decision at that time because there was just something inside me that said don't do it. And like I've said many times over, I trust my intuition over anything. I trust my intuition over what people might consider common sense. I trust my intuition over professional advice and whatever else you'd like to call it. No matter how logical something might sound, and even if my brain is processing information and it sounds completely logical, if my gut instinct says that something is off, I personally would trust that over anything else that anyone tells me. I had to find a way to articulate my reasons to Ahmed, so I basically had to spend a little bit of time with myself and try and understand why I was being guided not to do that. Just like the federal court, the appeals tribunal didn't have jurisdiction to grant Ahmed a visa. So even if we went through the appeals tribunal, and even if they found that the minister's delegate had made legal error in their decision to not grant him a protection visa the second time round, the only power and the only authority that the appeals tribunal had was to refer the decision back to the department again to remake. And God knows how long that could have taken. For all we know, that could have taken another 2 years. And honestly, I wasn't down for that. And I said to Ahmed, I go, we're not getting caught up in this whole fucking cycle all over again. Like, it's just a load of bullshit. Like, they can make a decision, they don't want to make a decision, but this time, unlike the first 2 times, this time round, they've given us an opportunity to appeal it through the tribunal. But the tribunal has no power to give him a visa. The tribunal has no jurisdiction to be able to issue him a visa or grant him a visa, which would then see him out of detention. They didn't have that power. So what was the point in us appealing through the tribunal? Like, for what? We already know that he can't be sent back to Syria. So what was the point in going through the system to potentially wait another 2 to 3 years to potentially receive the same decision again? And then what? So, you know, we could have been looking at 6, 7, 8 years. Who knows, like, how long Ahmed could be sitting in detention. So I basically said to Ahmed, I go, you know what? We are not appealing through the tribunal. I think it's a really bad idea because the tribunal doesn't have the jurisdiction or the authority to grant you a visa. And I basically said to Ahmed, if your visa was cancelled by the minister's delegate the very first time round that it was cancelled back in 2014, I said we 100% would have gone through the tribunal, because at that point in time, the delegate would have been cancelling a visa he already had. And in that scenario, if we had gone to the tribunal did have authority to reinstate his visa, which would then see him leave detention and back in the community. But this wasn't the case with Ahmed. They can't reinstate a visa that he didn't have. So we had applied for a protection visa. The protection visa was never granted. So the tribunal can't reinstate something that Ahmed has never been granted. So in that case, I said to Ahmed, it's really pointless. It's pointless for you to go to the tribunal and appeal this decision, because the tribunal isn't, in terms of hierarchy, it's not even as high as the federal court, and the federal court couldn't even issue a visa to him. All they could do was quash the minister's decision and tell him to remake it. And in this instance, the tribunal would have done the same thing. So I basically said it's a waste of time. It's going to take us 6 months in the tribunal to get a court date and get a hearing, and once it's been heard, wait for their decision. And once their decision comes, we already know that we're most likely going to win, because they will probably follow the footsteps of the ruling that the federal court gave us. But then it just goes back to the minister's department for them to remake that decision. And really, they probably just wanted to keep us in the system. They probably just want to to keep us in that whole fucking administrative system to say that we are currently processing your application and you are under administration. That's a whole load of fucking bullshit. So I said to our solicitor, I don't want to appeal, and I explained my reasons, and she respected that, and our 14 days lapsed and we basically didn't appeal. So where we're at now is it has been almost 6 months since we declined to appeal through the tribunal, and our lawyer has been working diligently with the department to try to get to some sort of resolution about Ahmed's case. To be honest, Ahmed and myself are at that point where we don't even really fucking care anymore. I've said to him a long time ago that I'm happy to go anywhere. Like, I honestly don't care anymore. Like, I don't care if they send him back to a different country. He doesn't care if he gets sent back to another country. We can restart our lives there. Like, we can pack up, we can go. But the problem that we have is that no country will accept applications from Ahmed to enter while he's in immigration custody, because technically he's in the care of Australia. They won't let him go. They won't release him to go into another country. And even if he said to them, take me back to Syria, I'm going back to Syria. I'll take my chances in Syria. I might not die. You know, I'll take my chances and dodge all the fucking bombs that are being dropped over there. They wouldn't let him go. Like, they physically will not release him. Even if he agrees to go back to Syria, they won't take him back. They won't let him go. He's pretty much fucked. Like, you can't leave. You can't go back to your country. They won't give you a visa to be in the community, but they won't let you out to go to your war-torn country either. There are a few things that I can't really mention right now because our lawyers are working on something and it hasn't evolved yet. So some of those things I can only talk about after it's unfolded. But I can say one thing for sure. I think we're a lot closer to getting a resolution right now than if we had chosen to appeal through the AAT. So guys, I'm gonna wrap this up right now. My battery's about to die. It's like 1 a.m. in the morning. I'm so wrecked, I'm so tired. But basically, that is why Ahmed is still in detention. Please pray for us. Please send us all white light and positive energies that you can, because honestly, I wouldn't wish this upon my worst enemy. It's horrible and unbearable to live in a situation where your future is so unknown, and it's not a nice place to be in. And honestly, I pray every day that this all comes to an end. So I hope you enjoyed today's video, guys. Remember to like, comment and subscribe. Stay updated for all the other videos that we've got coming. And like I said, my battery's about to die and I really need to close this out before it completely dies. Love you guys heaps and see you in the next video.
Try to do is have a Tim Tam and a coffee or a Milo, anything that's caffeine. So all you do, you grab a Tim Tam, you bite each corner off. So you go like that. And so you bite the both corners off, and then what you do, you grab the Tim Tam, put it inside the coffee, and you suck through the Tim Tam, and it's like a straw sucking the coffee. After you do that, you go like that.
You're so
And you're
cooked.
halfway knocked in your mouth. Best. You should try that when you buy Tim Tam and a caffeine.
She's doing it again. You keep thinking you're taking a photo. Crazy. You're doing it again.